The stranger on the table, the medical bay, was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the distant thump of boots echoing in the metal halls. Outside, a cold wind scraped against the outer walls of the outpost, carrying the dust of a broken moon. Inside, Lena moved carefully between the empty beds, checking supply trays and adjusting blankets, her hands steady from long hours of work, but her eyes tired from too little sleep. It was supposed to be a slow night. Most of the soldiers were stationed near the eastern ridge, and only a few stayed behind with light injuries. The silence was her companion, and she welcomed it. But then the heavy doors slid open and broke that silence. 2 guards walked in with urgent steps, and between them was a stretcher carrying a strange body. The figure on the stretcher was unlike anything she had seen in person before. Tall and thick, with dark gray skin and armored plates across the chest and limbs, his arms were bloodied and scorched. His left side looked crushed and twisted. One of the guards, a young man with a shaky voice, told her that this alien had pulled him out of a collapsing tunnel during a clash with a hostile force, saved him and another man before vanishing in the smoke. They found him later, collapsed near the edge of the ruins. No one else touched him because he was too heavy to move without machines. But he was still breathing and still alive. Lena nodded without speaking and pointed them to the open bed near the corner. The guards lowered the stretcher and stepped back, quickly, keeping their hands on their weapons. She noticed the way they stared at the alien, not with thanks or respect but with fear, as if he might wake up and attack them all. But Lena saw something else. Under the burns and bruises, she saw pain. Not just from wounds, but something deeper. Something familiar. After the guards left, Lena began her work. She cleaned the tools, opened the medkit, pulled on gloves. The alien's armor was scorched and fused in places, so she used special cutters to remove the broken pieces. Beneath the armor, the skin was burned and torn. She soaked a cloth and started cleaning the worst of it. Her hands worked slowly with care. She did not speak to him. She did not ask questions. This was the part of her job she always did the same way, no matter who was on the table, but something strange was happening as she worked. She kept feeling a soft pressure beneath the blanket that had been tossed across the alien's middle. At first she thought it was just the rise and fall of breath, or maybe something shifting under the cloth. But then it moved again, not like a twitch, not like breathing. It moved with purpose. It shifted. Lena froze. She narrowed her eyes and stepped back. Her hands stayed still in the air. The blanket moved again, and this time she was sure. There was something underneath it, not part of the alien. Not just bandages or equipment, something alive. Something hiding. She reached out slowly and lifted the corner of the blanket. The fabric came away without sound. And then she saw Ida's small shape, curled, breathing fast and shallow. It was a child. A young one of the same alien species. Skin lighter, face smoother, eyes large and full of fear. The child flinched when the light touched her face and then buried her head against the wounded chest of the adult. Beside her, Lena did not move. The child did not cry. She did not speak. But her tiny hand clutched at the adult's side like it was the only safe place in the universe. The adult stirred weakly, and his arm moved slightly to cover the child protectively, even while unconscious Lena took a small step back, her breath caught in her throat. This changed everything. She looked toward the security camera in the corner of the room. It blinked with a red light. Still recording, still watching. If the command staff saw this, they would report it. And then it would not be her decision anymore. She reached toward the terminal and pressed a quiet key to pause the feed. The light blinked once, then faded. Now she was alone with them. Truly alone. She turned back to the table. The child peeked up at her with wide dark eyes and did not move. Her small chest was rising fast with fear. Lena slowly crouched beside the bed and placed her hand on the edge where the child could see it. She did not speak but kept her eyes soft and calm. The child looked at her hand, looked at her face, then slowly leaned closer without letting go of the adult's body. Lena reached into the supply kit and pulled out a clean cloth. She soaked it with warm water and held it out in her open palm. The child looked at it, waited, then reached with a small hand and took it. No words were exchanged. But something passed between them in that moment. Not understanding of language, not trust, not yet. But something else. Lena stood again and moved to gather more supplies. The wounds still needed to be cleaned. The burns still needed care. And now there were two of them, one broken, one terrified. Both depending on her outside. The storm of dust blew harder against the walls of the outpost. The wind howled in the cracks and the night grew darker. But inside the medical bay, Lena worked with quiet hands and a steady heart. She did not yet know the names of the ones she was helping. She did not know why the child was here or what had happened before they arrived. She only knew one thing: she came to clean his wounds. And then the blanket moved. The hidden passenger, Lena, did not leave the medical bay for hours. She moved from table to cabinet to monitor with quiet steps. The child stayed close to the injured alien, never letting go of his arm, watching Lena with wide eyes. Each time she passed near, the child tensed and pulled the blanket tighter. Lena made sure to avoid sudden movements. She spoke to no one. She kept the feed paused. Outside, no one knocked, no one asked questions. The guards thought their work was done. The rest of the outpost remained unaware of what lay under that blanket. The man on the table, if he could be called a man, drifted between deep sleep and silent pain. His chest rose unevenly. His wounds bled less now, but his body showed signs of great stress. Burns marked half his side. Metal fragments remained near his ribs. His pulse was slow but steady. Machines read his vitals but not his story. The child had not moved much. She watched everything. When Lena brought water and left it near the bed, the child reached for it but did not drink right away. She pressed the cup to the man's lips first. Only after a drop passed his mouth did she take a sip herself. Lena noticed this. She felt something shift in her chest. She had seen many injured over the last year. Soldiers torn by blast waves. Scouts carried in on stretchers. Sometimes civilians from burned-out farms, but never this. Never a child hidden under a blanket. Never an alien father with a young one cradled in his arm, even while bleeding from his side. The silence of the room grew heavy. Lena sat near the wall with a small tablet in her hand. She pulled up medical files, cross-checked alien anatomy charts. Most of the information was rough. The species on her table did not belong to the dominant empire. They came from a region marked unstable and ignored by larger forces. Official records gave little more than warnings. Lena looked at the child again. Her skin had a strange glow. Not bright but faint like morning light through fog. Her eyes shimmered slightly when she blinked. Her fingers were long and thin. Her hair was short and curled tightly against her head. Her expression stayed unreadable. Then the man moved, his fingers switched. His mouth opened as if to speak. A low sound escaped his throat. Not words, not a growl. Just a sound filled with pain. The child leaned closer and touched his face gently. She whispered something soft. A word, maybe. Or a name. Lena stepped forward. She checked the monitor. His vitals spiked slightly. His breathing grew stronger. He opened his eyes just enough to see the girl beside him. His hand reached toward her but stopped short. Lena saw the moment he noticed her. His gaze shifted. His body tensed. He tried to move, but his muscles refused. He groaned low and tried to shield the child with one arm. Lena raised both hands and spoke softly. She told him she was here to help. She pointed to the monitor, to the cleaned wounds, to the fresh bandages. She did not know his language, but tried to show that she meant no harm. His eyes watched her for a long time, then he let his arm fall back. His chest rose once more, and he closed his eyes again. Lena waited a moment longer, then turned back to her table. The door chimed once. Someone stood outside. Her heart jumped. She moved fast, tapped the console, hid the child under the blanket again. Slid a curtain around the bed. She opened the door. A soldier stood there with a datapad. He asked about the alien, asked if it was still alive, asked if it had spoken or moved. Lena shook her head, said it was unconscious, said she needed more time. The soldier grunted and nodded. He reminded her that alien species were to be documented and scanned. He told her command wanted full reports by morning. Then he left without stepping inside. Lena closed the door, locked it from the inside. The child peeked from under the blanket. The man's hand reached again for her. Lena sat beside the bed and watched them. The child placed her head on the man's chest and closed her eyes. Time passed slowly in that quiet room, far from the war lines and away from command towers. Something very old and very human was happening. Not war, not power, just a father trying to protect his child. Just a girl trying to survive in a place she did not belong. Lena stood again and moved to a cabinet. She took out a scanner. She hesitated, then placed it gently near the man's arm. The screen lit up and displayed strange markings. Not injury data. Something else. A signal. Something had been activated when he entered the medbay. A pulse. A trace beacon. It was faint, but present. Lena narrowed her eyes. This was not part of the outpost system. This signal came from outside. From something older or distant. Possibly another ship. Possibly something worse. She turned off the scanner and looked at the two on the bed. If someone out there was looking for them, then time was running short. Lena touched her communicator and sent a short encrypted message to a contact she trusted. One line only: meet me in Lower Bay before sunrise. No question. She turned back and sat down. The child slept now. Her breath soft and even. The man did not move, but his hand remained around the child's small frame. Lena leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. This was no longer a medical case. This was a secreta. Dangerous one, and now she was part of it. The signal and the secret. The room felt colder now, though nothing had changed in the settings. The machines hummed as they always did. The lights stayed dim and soft. The child remained asleep, wrapped in the heavy blanket, close to the wounded alien, who had still not spoken again since the last groan of pain. But Lena sensed something shifting, not in the air or the temperature, but in the space between silence and thought, as if the story hidden in this room was now pressing against the walls, waiting to be heard. She stood near the scanner again, rechecking the pulse that had been sent from the alien's body. The pattern was steady, like a slow heartbeat pulsing outward, invisible to human eyes, but clear to those who knew how to look for it. It was not a cry for help, not a weapon, not a warning, but something softer, something designed to tell someone else that he was alive, still here, still holding on. Lena stared at the blinking lines and thought about the war they were all part of. It had been going on for years now, spreading from one system to the next. Humans were not the strongest species, but they were fast and stubborn, and they had survived longer than anyone expected. The enemy they fought now was cold and calculating machines wrapped in flesh minds, sharpened by conquest, not by compassion. The alien lying on her table was not one of them, not one of the conquerors. He had risked his life to save two human soldiers, and yet his fate still balanced on a thread. Door buzzed quietly only once and stopped. Lena turned quickly and pressed a button to unlock it. A tall figure stepped in, closing The door behind him without a word. His name was Reed, an engineer who rarely spoke unless something needed fixing. His face held no emotion, but his eyes were sharp like always. He looked at the alien, then at Lena, and waited. She handed him the scanner. He read the data, then raised his eyebrows slightly, not from surprise, but from understanding. He had seen signals like this before, not often, but enough to know they meant trouble. He asked where it was going, and Lena shrugged. She told him it might be bouncing through relays or maybe just echoing through the void until someone picked it up. He nodded slowly, then turned to look at the child, now waking again. Rubbing her eyes with quiet fingers, Reed asked if Command knew. Lena said no. Reed asked if she wanted him to tell. Lena shook her head. He paused for a moment, then walked to the console and shut down the camera feed completely. Not just paused, but erased the record from the last 12 hours. Then he turned back and said nothing more. The man on the table stirred again, this time his eyes opened longer. He looked at Reed, then at Lena, then at the child who was now sitting upright beside him. Her hands touched his chest gently, as if she was checking for something. The man blinked slowly. His mouth opened, and finally words came out, broken and soft, shaped by pain and effort. His voice was low but carried weight, each word like a stone dropped into still water. He asked where he was. He asked who they were. Lena answered in simple words. She told him her name, told him this was a human medical bay, told him he was hurt badly and not in danger, not yet. He nodded once, then looked at the child and spoke to her in a language neither Lena nor Reed understood. The child answered quickly. Her voice shook as if holding back fear or sorrow. Then the man looked back at Lena. His eyes held something strange, not hate, not fear, not distrust, but something else, something cautious, yet curious, like someone seeing fire for the first time, and not knowing whether to fear it or follow. I've told her his name was Kale. He said the child was his daughter. Her name was Ree. He said they were not part of the enemy forces. They were running, hunted not by humans, but by the Empire itself. Reed stepped forward, asked why they were targeted. Kale's face hardened. He said they helped people escape, not just their own kind, but others too. He said the Empire feared mercy, feared what kindness could do, feared the idea that soldiers might see children on the other side and choose not to kill. Lena listened without speaking. Her thoughts spun in all directions. This was no longer just a medical case, or even a rescue. This was now a question of loyalty, of belief, of what it meant to be human in a war that turned everyone into machines. Reed asked if the signal could be stopped. Kale said it was part of his armor, old tech, not meant to send distress, but to keep others from forgetting him. If he fell, he said it might have reached someone, or maybe it would fade out in the cold, empty dark. But even as he spoke, Lena saw a light blink on the wall panel, not bright, not loud, but real. Message: a ship had entered orbit in known signature, silent approach, no contact. Reed stepped back, his hand already reaching for the Cobra manual override near the exit. Lena stood still, her eyes on the child, now sitting quietly beside her father, no fear in her face, just calm, as if this was something she expected. The room seemed smaller now, as if the walls had moved closer. The signal had been heard. Someone was coming, not command, not rescue, something else. Lena turned to Reed and told him they had to move, not later, not tomorrow, not when orders arrived, but now. Reed looked at her, then at the girl, then at the wounded man who could barely stand. He asked how she. Said she had a plan. He said it better be good. She said it wasn't, but it was the only one they had. Escape plan. The hallway outside the medical bay was quiet, but the silence no longer felt safe. It felt like the pause before a storm, the kind that swallows everything before anyone understands what is happening. Lena stepped carefully, keeping her steps light, her eyes watching every corner. Reed walked beside her, his face set with calm, but his hands never far from the tool he wore on his belt. Not a weapon, but something close, something sharp enough to cut wires or slice open panels if they needed to move fast behind them. Kale moved slowly, his arm around the small shoulders of Ree, who walked with steady steps, holding onto her father's side, though he leaned heavier with each passing moment. His breathing was labored, his legs weak, but he did not fall, and he did not ask to stop. Every few seconds he looked around, his eyes scanning walls and doors, like a soldier still on the edge of battle. The lights in the corridor flickered once, a signal, maybe, or just failing power, no one knew for sure. But it made them move faster. Lena led them through the maintenance sector, past a locked stairwell and down a short metal ladder where the air smelled of grease and old filters. The outpost had many levels, and most staff never saw this one. Storage units, abandoned drones rusted in the corners. Broken crates half buried in dust and forgotten parts. Reed moved to a panel and used his tool to unlock a hatch, then pulled it open with a sharp creak. They stepped through into a dark passage, narrow and tight, where only two could walk side by side. Ree stayed close to her father, not saying a word, her small hand gripping his coat as if afraid he might vanish into the dark. Lena whispered instructions to Reed, and he nodded, then went ahead to prepare the dock. The path they followed led toward a backup launch bay, one not used since the first wave of fighting months ago. The main hangars were watched, always busy, always under command eyes, but this bay was forgotten. Damaged during the early raids and never repaired fully. That was why Lena chose it, not because it was safe, because it was invisible. They reached a steel door covered in black scorch marks. Lena pressed her hand to the panel, but the system did not respond. She tried again, nothing. Cale stepped forward, placed his hand beside hers, and the panel blinked once, then opened slowly, without sound. Lena turned to look at him, said nothing, but she knew his armor, his blood, his signal. Even the door spoke the same language inside. The launch bay dust floated in the air, and the lights were dim. But one ship remained, not large, not clean, but still holding together. Barely a transport vessel made for two. Maybe three people, but enough to carry them if luck stayed on their side. Reed was already inside, checking controls, moving quickly over the board, testing power flow and fuel reserves. His hands moved with speed trained from years of field work, not elegant but sure. He looked at Lena and nodded. The ship could fly, not far, but maybe far enough. Suddenly a noise echoed from the corridor. Outside, not loud, not close, but clear enough to freeze them all in place. Voices, footsteps, not many but armed. The outpost had received the orbital signal. Command was moving. Cale gritted his teeth and took a deep breath. He pulled Ree behind the crate and pointed to the far end of the bay where shadows stretched across the floor. Lena grabbed a med case from the table near the door and followed quickly. Reed stayed by the controls. The door to the bay hissed open. 3 figures stepped in, soldiers, their suits marked with patrol symbols. Weapons drawn, not raised but ready. One of them called out, asked who was inside, said the scan showed life signs, said orders were clear. No one without clearance enters this area. Lena stepped forward from behind the crate, holding the med case in one hand and her badge in the other. She told them she came to check the storage for missing supplies. Told them Reed was with her to check the emergency systems. Told them the power blinks triggered an alert on her console. Lead soldier narrowed his eyes, stepped forward, looked past her toward the ship, then stopped. He asked what that was. Lena said an old escape pod, still broken, still marked for disposal. Soldier looked at her longer this time, as if weighing her voice, not her words. Then he stepped closer. He said he wanted to scan the area. Reed moved suddenly, fast and without sound. He appeared behind the soldier and struck once with a small rod. The man dropped with a thud. The other two turned in shock. One fired once. The bolt missed Reed. Through the rod it hit the second man in the arm. The third turned his weapon toward the ship. Then Cale moved. He did not run. He leapt, not like a man but like a force thrown by gravity and fury. He landed between the third soldier and the ship. His hand struck once. The weapon flew out of reach. The soldier fell, gasping for air. Silence followed. Then Lena rushed forward, grabbed Ree, and pulled her toward the open ramp. Cale followed, limping, bleeding again but moving. Reed closed the hatch and powered the ship engines. Came alive with a low hum. The doors to the bay cracked open, revealing the dark outside. The moon's surface bathed in weak light, the stars beyond watching like silent witnesses. The ship rose slowly, turned, and shot into the sky. Alarms triggered below, but they were already gone inside the ship. Kale sat against the wall, breathing heavy. His arm around Ree, who held onto him without shaking. Lena sat near the front, watching the screen as the stars stretched, and the world behind them fell away. Reed said nothing, just flew ahead, waited questions. Chase may be worse, but for now they were free, and freedom tasted like air after fire. Humanity shows through the stars outside the small window, moved slow at first, then began to stretch as the ship crossed the boundary between orbit and deep space. The engines hummed low beneath the floor, like a soft growl kept under control. Reed kept his hands on the control's eyes, watching blinking lights, lips pressed tight as if silence kept the ship flying. Lena sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the empty space ahead, not looking back, not speaking. Just breathing steady, her thoughts swirling like wind trapped in a glass box behind them. Kale sat slumped against the wall, his head tilted back, his eyes half open. His chest rose and fell uneven, and his jaw clenched with every breath. He held his daughter close. Ree rested her head on his shoulder, her fingers tangled in the folds of his jacket, as if afraid even now that he might fade away. The ship was not built for comfort, not meant for travel longer than a few hours. Most of the panels blinked warnings. One engine coughed once and kept going, but no one spoke of stopping. Reed checked the nav system and gave Lena a single nod. There was a place they could reach, not a station, not a colony, but a hollowed asteroid used once by smugglers. Later abandoned, forgotten now, except by those who needed to disappear. Lena said nothing, but looked back at Kale, who had closed his eyes again, but still held Ree with the same care as before. She stood slowly, walked to a supply rack and pulled out a cloth, dipped it in clean water, and returned to kneel beside him. His skin was still cracked, his wound still fresh, his breath shallow, but his grip on life strong like roots refusing to be torn from soil. She began to clean his side again, her movements gentle, her face calm. Ree watched her silently, then shifted just enough to let Lena reach the bandage beneath. Kale opened his eyes and looked down at Lena, his lips parted. He spoke slowly, each word thick but clearer than before. He said thank you. Said he did not expect mercy, said most who saw his kind turned away or called for soldiers or worse. But she did not. Lena answered with quiet words, told him she had seen too much death, too much hate, and when she looked at Ree, she did not see threat. She saw a child, nothing more and nothing less. Kale nodded slowly, his eyes heavy. He said he once believed all humans were like the ones who burned planets with fire and steel, but now he saw something else. And though he did not understand why she helped, he was grateful more than he could say. Ree reached out and took Lena's hand, her small fingers warm and firm. Lena looked at her and smiled, a tired smile, not wide but real. Reed announced that they would reach the asteroid in 30 minutes if nothing failed. Lena asked if it was safe. Reed said no place was safe, but this was quiet enough for now. The ship rocked slightly as they entered a dust cloud, thin and harmless, but it made the hull groan. The lights flickered once Kale tensed. Ree clutched his arm, but Lena stood and placed her hand on the wall, steadying herself, then turned back toward the front. Outside the window, the asteroid came into view, rough-shaped, dark against the stars, not large, but wide enough to hide a ship for a while. Reed slowed the approach, guided the ship into a narrow crevice barely wide enough to hold it, metal scraped stone. But the ship landed with a solid thud. Dust settled around them. Silence followed. Then Reed opened the hatch. The air inside the asteroid was stale but breathable. A narrow tunnel led deeper into the rock walls, marked by old lights, some flickering, some dead. Reed went first. Lena helped Kale walk while Ree stayed close, one hand on her father, the other on the wall, as if guiding him through memory. They reached a chamber, deeper inside were crates and blankets. Remain from another time. Someone once lived here, maybe a traitor, maybe a thief. But now it was home, even if only for a night. Kale lowered himself to the floor, his back against the wall, his body shaking from pain, but his face calm. Ree sat beside him and leaned on his arm. Reed checked the scanners, no signals, no signs of pursuit, just cold silence around them. Lena unpacked supplies, cleaned the wounds again, gave Kale another dose of pain relief, then sat down near the small heater built into the wall. Heat spread slow, but it was enough for a while. No one spoke. Then Kale looked up at Lena and asked what would happen next. Lena said she did not know, said she could not return to the outpost, said her name was already flagged. Her choices now marked her as a traitor to some and as something else to others. Reed said he would not go back either, said he had stayed quiet too long, and now silence felt like a chain. He no longer wanted to wear. Kale said there were others like him, others who ran, others who helped, others who believed war could not erase kindness completely. Lena asked if there was a place they gathered. Kale nodded, said it was far, said it was hidden, but said it existed, and maybe now was the time to go there. Lena looked at Ree, who had fallen asleep again, her head in her father's lap, her breathing slow, her hands still curled near her face. Lena said she would go. Reed said he would go too. Kale closed his eyes and whispered something soft, maybe a name, maybe a prayer. In that cold chamber deep inside Forgotten Rock, 3 humans and 2 aliens sat together, not as enemies, not as tools of war, not as fugitives, but as survivors of something larger than borders or orders outside. The stars kept moving, the void kept spinning. But inside that space, a choice had been made, not a loud choice, not a grand one, but a simple, quiet, human choice to help, to protect, to begin again. And as Lena leaned her head back against the wall, her eyes closing at last, she remembered how it all began. She just wanted to clean his wounds. But the blanket moved, and nothing was the same again. The end.